Hi there, I'm Bill DeYoung, and this is the Catalyst Sessions for Friday. My guest tonight is Mike Deeson, a 35-year investigative journalist, Emmy-winning investigative journalist from WTSP, 50 years journalism experience, and Mike has written a book, which we are going to talk about tonight. Hello, sir. How are you today?
Bill, I'm doing great, thank you. How are you?
I'm all right. It's a hot day.
It is.
But, you and I spoke a week or two ago for the SAP Catalyst, and I'm glad to have you here tonight because there's a lot of interest in your book, so I'm glad to talk about it again. Bad news for you is good news for me. First of all, what does that mean? Tell people what that means.
Well, as an investigative reporter, when I would start working on a story, it was usually about someone who had done something wrong. Yeah, I mean, the payoff for the viewer is showing the bad guy or bad woman has done something wrong, and then we expose it. So it's bad for them, but it's good for me.
Yeah, okay. I was thinking about it because obviously I read the book, and there's a lot of stories I want to chat with you about. I mean, I get that, but there's also a lot of things, following the presidents. Not necessarily bad news, like maybe it would be today, but we're not going there.
Right.
The Clinton stuff I definitely want to talk about. Then I read your interview with Colonel Sanders, which is just funny. So it's not all bad news.
It's not all bad news, no, but I mean, from the investigative standpoint, that's what it was.
Yeah.
No, there was some good news, some fun news in there,
Well, I just want to make that clear for people that, while you did witness executions and there was some, and you did get beat up.
That was bad. That was bad news for them. Yeah.
Well, yeah. But I mean, it's not all, and the chapter about Terry Schiavo is obviously very moving.
That was emotional. Yeah.
You were 35 years with WTSP, but let's run the clock back. Where are you from originally, and how did you get started in broadcast?
I'm from Chicago, Skokie. It's a suburb of Chicago.
Uh-huh.
I always wanted to be doing something like this. I knew it from the moment I was in high school. I told my high school guidance counselor, this is what I wanted to do. And she said to me, as a freshman, you're going to the University of Missouri, and that's all I'll hear of. And she tailored all my courses to get into Mizzou, and I went to the University of Missouri, which fine journalism school, not necessarily that I'm a product of that, but it changed my life. It really did, going to Mizzou, and I learned how to do journalism. Because as you know, being a journalist, you can read everything in the books. You got to do it.
Oh, yeah.
In many ways.
I sucked for the first, some would say I still do.
No, I read your stuff. It's good.
At least the first 10 years, I was like, oh, God. You ever go back and look at your early stuff and go, geez.
Oh, yeah. Because of the magic of videotape, sometimes people from the station, I worked in Norfolk for 10 years, and the archive, and every once in a while, someone will send me something from the archive, from a story I did 40 years ago, and I go, oh, man, alive.
I wouldn't hire this kind of bad. Norfolk, was that Virginia?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So that was your first big TV gig?
No, I started out in Columbia, Missouri in 1968, shooting on black and white film on a wind-up Bell and Howell 3-turret lens camera. It was silent film. Then I went from there. I went to Jackson, Michigan, Flint, Michigan, Saginaw, Michigan, Rochester, Buffalo, Norfolk, 10 years. Here. Now I've been here almost 40 years.
Were you an investigator? Let's talk about Norfolk, for 10 years. Were you an investigative journalist there?
Well, no, it happened in Norfolk. I mean, I started out as a general assignment reporter.
Yeah.
I became a political reporter, covered General Assembly and all. And then I found out, going to shock you, politicians lie.
Oh, this interview is over.
I realized there was nothing more exciting than to have a piece of paper proving the politician was lying and let him go on and on camera. And I would say, well, what about this bill that you just wrote? And and they do the Fred Flintstone, hobbit.
I think that's Ralph Cramden, by the way.
Ralph Cramden. That's right. That's it. So
get your facts straight.
Fred Flintstone was Ralph Cramden on cartoon, really.
Yeah, you're right.
Think about
exactly.
But nonetheless, I got such a thrill out of that I went, well, really what I want to shift into is investigations. And then I started doing more of that in Norfolk, and then ended up with the job here after I had been rejected from some of the finest TV stations in the country. And then I quit looking, and out of the blue, they called me one day and said, "Hey, how'd you like to come to Tampa?"
Who was your role model? I mean, was it Edward Murrow? Was it Mike Wallace? You know?
I liked Wallace a lot. I liked Cronkite a lot.
Yeah.
I spoke at my college graduation.
Wow.
And this was in 1970. My senior year was Kent State. And he was just great. He had already done the Mr. President, We Can't Win in Vietnam editorial on the CBS Evening News. So between him and Cronkite, and actually, I thought as a reporter, Dan Rather was really good. I didn't think he was very good as an anchor.
I remember him at the convention. I mean, those clips are unbelievable on the floor.
Yeah. So those are the people I tried to emulate, and just do good stories, find interesting stuff, because I'm a big believer in playing by the rules. And when I would catch, particularly a politician or a government employee, breaking the rules or enriching himself or herself, I felt the public had to know. And I was a pain in the butt. Absolutely, I will admit it. I was a pain in the butt, but I always viewed myself as like the sand in an oyster, to hopefully make the community a little bit better by irritating the bad people in the oyster.
Well, to mix a metaphor, it's great. So you certainly got to a point down here where people, and I say this with all respect, hated seeing you coming. Especially somebody who's like, "Oh God, here comes this guy. He's gonna catch me."
Yeah.
I mean, was that the sort of thing? You really built a name for yourself down here for this sort of
Yeah, I did. I just away from working a story, I am the most laid back person in the world. I really am. My friends who would see me on TV would go, "Is that you?" But I would get crazed. I would get personally offended when people tried to enrich themselves as politicians and thought they were better than somebody else. It really got me going, and I thought I had to expose them. I had to let people know about them, and in many cases they voted against them, or they got fired, or they went to jail. Yeah. And I had real satisfaction out of doing that.
Describe to me a eureka moment for you. Your research is a big part of your work there, doing that. I mean, maybe in general terms, you're looking through stacks of paper and you find that one thing that says, "This guy is a rat. He's stealing. He's cheating. He's lying." How often did that happen in your research?
Well, a lot.
Smoking gun, as it were.
Well, here's what happened, Bill. Is most of my stories, as any investigative reporter will tell you, comes from tips.
Yeah, of course.
And sometimes the tips don't work out. But the reason I had such good sources, I would always call back the people who gave me the tips and say, "No, what you said was partially true, was partially not true." But then when I really got the goods, because I was a paperwork freak. I made more public records requests than probably every other reporter in the station combined. And I'm on the board of the First Amendment Foundation, where we fight to keep public records public. So I had tons of paperwork. And as a matter of fact, because if you look at my desk here and in the office or at work, it looks like I'm disorganized. Before we had PDFs that you could make for paperwork, when I would get paperwork, I'd bring it back to the station, run to the copy machine, make massive copies of it, and put all the paper in the "in case I lose it" pile. And then if I lost it, I would go to the "in case I lose it" pile, go back to the copy machine, make more of them. But I had paperwork everywhere. I had a piling system, not a filing system. But that was also important because, as I mentioned in the book, I was sued a bunch of times. We always won on summary judgment.
Sure.
Every story I did went through our producer, our executive producer, our either news director, assistant news director, and then I'd do a conference call with our Washington attorney, who would put me on the witness stand and say, "Okay, you say this. What do you have to back it up to say that?"
This is before anything aired, right?
Oh yeah, definitely before anything aired.
Wow. How often did it happen? I don't know. I'm just pulling this out of the air, Mike. But what your lawyer in Washington says didn't get a satisfactory answer. Like, I don't think you proved that well enough. Would you have to pull a fact out?
Absolutely. And then sometimes our attorneys in D.C. were pretty good. The final one that I worked with there had been a newspaper reporter before going to law school. And he say, all right, and that makes me feel really uncomfortable.
Yeah.
The way you worded that, he said, but would you be fine with saying it? And he would say, how about this sentence? And sometimes I say, well, that doesn't hit to the point enough. He said, well, how about this? And we would work it out together. I can defend that with the paperwork you have. But it was a back and forth process for that long conference call.
Some of the more interesting, not more interesting, most interesting sections of the book. It's all, a lot of it's procedural. Like, this is how I got this story. And a lot of it, the stuff that I really liked, was sort of day to day. I loved the Saudi Arabia trip, because it's like nothing incredible happened. It was just like I felt like I was there.
Yeah.
And can you talk about that? I remember, Schwarzkopf at McDill and all that, but you went over there. You were in bed for a while.
Well, here's what happened. The military made a concerted decision because of what happened in Vietnam.
Yeah.
Try to get good publicity for the Gulf War. Some brilliant person at the Pentagon thought of this and said, why don't we get the local media to cover the local troops that are going to be fighting in Saudi Arabia?
Right, the hometown media, right?
Yeah. So I went over on a trip, and I think there were a couple of them where it had a media member from every TV station, all the newspapers. Back then we had more than one newspaper in the Bay Area. And we went to Saudi Arabia because Schwarzkopf was from here. The 6th Air Mobility Medical Unit was from here. And there were a ton of folks from MacDill that were over there. So we flew over on a military jet. And I don't know if you've ever been on a military airplane, but
no, but after I read the chapter, I felt like I had.
I'm going to tell you that there are two temperatures on a military jet: Antarctica and hell.
Yeah.
And I knew that in advance. Some people had told me. But so you're all bundled up, and it's noisy. You've got to wear earplugs, and it's uncomfortable. And then the pilot goes, "Yeah, maybe we ought to turn on some heat." And then it's the Sahara Desert. So just getting there was a pain. And then among the things we did, one day they took us out to see the Patriot missiles in the middle of the desert, because they didn't know what Saddam was going to do, in Gulf War I. And we had to carry gas gear wherever we went because they thought he might use poison gas. Well, it was 115 degrees in the desert. And they made everybody, every 15 minutes, drink down a whole bottle of water, general or just a reporter like me. And I come down the day we're supposed to go out to the desert, and it was in December. Now, they had an actual start date for the war in January, sort of goofy. They said, this is the day we're going to start shooting. And I don't have the gas gear. And everybody from the other stations and newspapers go, Mike, where's your gas gear? I say, it's 115 degrees in the desert. The war's not going to start for 3 weeks. I'm not taking it. We got to schlep along all sorts of other stuff. They said, Mike, you are really smart. So we're out in the middle of the desert.
Really smart, Mike.
Yeah. At that point. So now we're in a tent in the middle of the desert. There's netting in it, and you hear on MASH when they used to go. Remember when you hear incoming?
Oh yeah.
We heard Scud missile alert, Scud missile alert. Well, the captain who's giving us the briefing is talking, so I figure it's a drill. And then all of a sudden, a sergeant runs in and he goes, Captain, we're under a Scud missile attack. And the captain says, you sit tight, and they both go running out, and I see through the netting in the tent, they're putting up the Patriot missiles, getting ready to fire these things. And I'm thinking, holy cow. My wife was pregnant at the time with our youngest child, and she told me if I got killed, she'd kill me again.
Again, right.
And and then the sergeant comes running back in, and he's in full gas gear. And he goes, gas gear, everybody. So all my friends from the media who thought I was smart an hour and a half ago are now looking at me like you're going to get us killed, Deeson.
Yeah. We're all dead, Deeson. Right. Thanks.
Yeah.
Thanks, pal.
And they took us to a safe house. It turned out Israel had launched a missile, a test missile, forgot to tell the United States the war was started that day. Well, anyway, they then told us the next day we might not be able to talk to Schwarzkopf very long because of all this. Turns out everything was fine with Schwarzkopf. He comes in. He is as friendly as can be. I'm sitting to the right of him. He's sitting right over here. And we're talking, and he's talking about things. And then somebody asked a question. It was actually a photographer who asked, and we should have asked. And he said, General, let me ask this tough question. are Americans ready to see the sight of their young servicemen coming home in body bags? And Schwarzkopf, it was like you had lit a 4th of July rocket. He went ballistic, and he pounded on the desk after every word. He went, "None of my men are coming home in body bags." And as he's doing this, I'm backing away.
Yeah, you're feeling like 2 inches tall, like,
Yeah, he scared the hell out of me. Well, and then he calmed down, and he realized that maybe he shouldn't have done that on camera. And then he said, "Look, we may have casualties, but I hate the term body bags. They'll all come home in decent caskets if there are, and he didn't know how successful the war effort would be." And then one other really funny thing happened on that. So there was a lieutenant commander who was in charge of all the media, a really nice guy, John Genro. And Schwarzkopf turns to him and he goes, "Lieutenant Commander, would you mind doing me a favor?" Well, when a 4-star general asks the lieutenant commander, "Do you mind doing me a favor?" He goes,
"Sure, I will."
"What can I do for you?" He says, "Would you take home this vase," not a vase, it was a vase, to Mrs. Schwarzkopf that the King of Saudi Arabia gave to me. And he goes, "Yeah." Now this guy was nervous through the thing that he was going to break it and all. We come back to the States, landed at a base in South Carolina. I can't remember where it was. And there's a customs guy who's in the service who believes the Genro is smuggling in this expensive vase. And so he says to the customs guy, he goes, "No, really, General Schwarzkopf gave me this to take home to Mrs. Schwarzkopf." And the guy says, "And I suppose the King of Saudi Arabia gave it to him." And we all went, "Yeah." And they were going to throw him in the brig. All of us pitched in like, I don't know, $50 a person. We expensed it, of course, and kept him from going to jail. But that was, the Saudi Arabia trip was a pretty amazing trip.
Well, that's one of the things I like about the book, because it will, you never know what's going to come next, because one day it's something like that, or it's the trip to Guantanamo, and then it's the president's, and then it's something really serious and dramatic, and then you took somebody down, and you're like, "Yay, Mike!" But then it goes back up again. Didn't you tell me that you had millions more stories, that this book could have been a lot longer?
Absolutely, it could have been twice as long. I have so many other stories that I didn't put in the book, because what I try to do is, it has a Tampa Bay feel to it,
Yeah.
but I wanted to write a book that someone who had never seen me on TV and had no idea who I was might pick up and go, "Well, this is sort of interesting," and just give them a sort of a view into local TV and how it works. So let me tell you a story that's not in the book that I love.
Okay.
But it was too local. Kevin White, the county commissioner who went to jail for bribery in Hillsborough County. I did a lot of tough stories on Kevin. Like once he used campaign money to buy suits. But Kevin loved me. And when I called him on it, I said, "Kevin, I've noticed this." And he said, "I'll meet you at the tailor shop." And we did the interview right there. So anyway, he was arrested, went to federal prison for bribery. And I get a call on a Sunday morning. I'm playing golf at Heritage Harbor. I know the hole I'm at, and it's got a 404 area code. And I usually don't answer the phone unless it's my wife, my kids, grandkids, or something like that.
Yeah.
I answer it. So I hear on the other end of the line, "Hello, Mike, this is Kevin." And I go, "Kevin?" He goes, "Yeah, Kevin White. They smuggled the phone into the prison, and I wanted to call you." And I said, "Kevin, call your wife, call your kids." He said, "Oh, I already did that." He said, "But you know everything that's going on in Tampa Bay, and I want to know all the political scoop." So I told him, but that wasn't I cut that out of the book just because I would have to get into the Kevin, and nobody knows Kevin out of here. And all. I love that story, but it didn't make it into the book.
Well, volume 2 then.
Yeah.
Can you tell the story about Bill Clinton, because this really resonated with me?
I love the Bill Clinton story.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
I was covering Bill McBride's campaign. The final week, I flew around the state with him. Another one of our reporters was with Jeb. And when you get off, you fly to all these little small airports. And the first thing I do when you get off a small plane is I run to the bathroom. Okay?
Okay.
On the small plane.
I'm glad to know that.
Okay. The bathroom, I think it was in West Palm. I'm not sure. I started to open the door, and Bill Clinton pulls the handle. And I mean, you don't expect to see Bill on the other side. And I went, "Mr. President." And he goes, "Come right in." So anyway, but that was the initial thing. Then we flew around the state, he gave some speeches. And then we went from, I think, South Dade Community College to South Beach. And we get the presidential motorcade. He's no longer president at this time, but they stopped the traffic and all that. We get to South Beach, and the media bus stops right in front of a Starbucks. We don't know what's going on. I stick stuff out and said, what's happening? And Clinton goes, we're a little early. I thought I'd buy the traveling media some coffee. So the Secret Service storms the Starbucks, scares the hell out of everybody inside. We all go in. I'm up there first, and Clinton says, what do you want? I said, just, black coffee. And he says, cream and sugar's back there. I said, no, I take it black. So get my coffee. Then we get in the circle, and it's Clinton, me, Bill Nelson, who was at the time the junior senator. Was junior? And he was senator from Florida. Yeah. Reporter, the photographer I'm working with, another photographer, and Chris Tucker, the actor, who had become with Clinton. They went to Africa together. And as a matter of fact, Clinton said, that's when I knew I wasn't president, when everybody in Africa said, who's that little gray-haired guy with Chris Tucker? But anyway, so I turned to Clinton with my coffee, and I'm playing reporter. I said, I want to know this. And Clinton goes, hey, you know all about me. I want to know about you. And then he starts asking me questions about being a local reporter and, what it involves, what are some of my favorite stories and problems. So he talks to me maybe 5-10 minutes on that. Then he goes around the group, does the same thing, asks questions to every one of them. It's been at least 15 minutes since I've said a word to Clinton. And he turns to me and he says, Mike, remembered my name, first off. Secondly, he said, you said something earlier I need a clarification on, which meant he was listening to what I was saying. It was the best life lesson I have ever had, because if the former president of the United States can, first off, remember my name and pay attention to what I'm saying, shame on me if I don't do the same thing to every person I meet. So when I meet someone, I always shake their hand, ask them their name, and I'll usually say it out loud to myself so I'll remember it.
Yeah.
But pay attention to what they're saying. I don't know if you've ever been with someone who thinks they're really important and they're talking to you and they're looking around to see who else they can influence and all that stuff. Well, when I was
I know, I've had that experience.
Yeah, haven't we all?
Yeah.
So he stared me in the eye, and that's exactly what I do with everybody that I meet. I don't want anybody ever to say, that Mike Deeson thinks, he's something special. He didn't think I was worthwhile or anything like that.
It's funny. That was a great life lesson to you. And when I read that in your book, I thought, I've been doing what I do for a long time, but damn, if I really should do that. I mean, I'm an old guy, but yeah.
Me too.
Well,
me too.
We're never too old to learn something new. Tell me about Deeson Media and Broken and the project you're working on, the film, because I think this is fascinating. This is what you left WTSP
3 years ago, 3.5 years ago.
And you're coming into Deeson Media. Tell the folks here what you're working on.
Well, the big project that I'm working on right now, that I actually finished the final version of it last night, is about elephants being abused in circuses. A nonprofit came to me and asked me to do this documentary. I've worked on it for 2 years. I've covered the country doing interviews and putting it together. People think that since Ringling went out of business, there are no longer circuses and there are no longer elephants and animals used in circuses, which is not true. There still are circuses that tour the country. And from the elephant standpoint, it is just a horrendous life. First of all, they beat the crap out of them to train them. They still beat them sometimes if they don't perform the way they should. And they are chained 19 hours a day or put in a boxcar going around to the next town. I have been to Africa. I've seen elephants in Africa. In Africa, elephants spend most of the day roaming and eating. The trees and all of that stuff. It is a terrible, terrible life. So I've been working on this film, and the goal of the film is to convince people not to go to circuses that use animals, because from the economic standpoint, that hurts them. And secondly, there is a federal bill called TEPSPA, the Exotic Animal Public Special Protection Act, that would prohibit animals being moved across state lines for circuses. New Jersey passed a law sort of like that. Hawaii has a law like that, and that's what we're hoping that the film will accomplish. It really, if I haven't screwed it up, and I don't think I have, but I could have, I think this could be one of the most important pieces of journalism I've ever done.
You're still looking for the bad guys, man.
I am. I am.
Did you actually go to trainers and get in their face and say, "Hey, this is against the law, what you're doing here"?
Well, the problem was with the circuses. I tried to get to them, but they were all walled up. I confronted a woman there was a Florida Wildlife Commission hearing where they had people who had exotic animal permits, and everybody was running for my cameras. There was one woman who agreed to talk to me. Didn't give me her name, but she did agree to talk to me. And I have a lot of undercover video. Not that I shot, but I interviewed people who shot the video.
Oh, sure.
And she said, all that video is fake. Well, let me tell you something. When you see somebody hitting an elephant, and I'm happy to say I've seen it hundreds of times, and I'm not desensitized to it. I jump every time I see someone hit the elephant. But so I confronted her. I also confronted FWC. Florida Wildlife Commission is in charge of exotic animals in Florida. They do a terrible job. Florida, surprisingly, has some pretty stringent laws about how you're supposed to treat the animals, but these guys have no interest and really no knowledge on how to do that. They want to deal with hunting and fishing. You know, that's what they're interested in, and they have really done a terrible job. So I confronted a major in Florida Wildlife Commission about that. That's a fairly funny story, I think. In fact, I went to a Florida Wildlife Commission meeting in St. Augustine, and the public relations guy said, I wanted to talk to this major. And he said, no, we're not going to talk today. We don't want to talk to you. And I said, well, that's your prerogative, like I always say.
Yeah.
But he's going to have to tell me that on camera. And he said, are you going to chase him around this hotel? I said, as a matter of fact, I am. First off, this is a public meeting. Secondly, I'm guest at this hotel. So
you can. Yeah.
Right to be here. I stayed at the hotel on purpose. Yeah. And so about a half an hour later, he came back to me and said, yeah, I've seen your stuff. We'll do the interview.
Your reputation worked out in your favor.
Yeah.
The film is broken, and you're trying to get it considered for Sundance?
Yeah, the people who hired me want to submit it to Sundance. The only problem with it is Sundance requires that they have the world premiere. You're not guaranteed you'll get in. I told that to these people. That, you know, I think there's a shot at it, but there's no guarantee. So we submit to Sundance. I think August 15th is the deadline for Sundance. We don't find out till late fall whether we get in. And if not, we'll go to other areas to do it. But we can't do anything with the film until Sundance says yay and nay, because Sundance is the 800-pound gorilla. I mean, if we get into Sundance, we probably get onto Netflix.
Yeah.
But
doesn't it, you can get on Netflix if you're not on Sundance too. I mean.
Absolutely, absolutely. But I think it makes sense to try to do that. So
we'll see. Well, Mike Deeson, the book is bad news for you, is good news for me, and it's been such a pleasure speaking with you, my friend. I'm supposed to say this, published by St. Petersburg Press.
Let me tell you,
owns the St. P. Catalyst. We're the same.
Yeah, they are wonderful people. I've got to give a shout out to Amy Cianci.
Amy's great.
She guided me through this whole process, slapped me a couple of times, and not only kidding.
She's watching you now.
They really were wonderful. I was thrilled with the way things came out. This was a labor. The way I put it, honestly, is that this area has been just wonderful to me. I am so fortunate, and I hope that, although obviously I would make a profit if people buy the book, but I also hope it's a little gift to Tampa Bay so they can see what went on behind the scenes, and I hope they enjoy it.
Well, the book is available through Amazon. I think you can get it through stppress.com and probably at local booksellers everywhere. I'll say, if you're watching this, you should get it. Tell them below. We'll talk. Mike Deeson, thank you so much. And always a pleasure to talk to you, my friend, and continued success. And we'll be looking for the film.
Thanks, Bill.
Take care, buddy.